Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. How is everybody this evening? Chewy, hello sir. Welcome to another edition of Big Hairy News. How's things?
Oh, it must be a Monday. Hello. Yes, I'm doing all right.
I always love Mondays because I always find myself still doing things like literally right now as we go to start the show, as I copy and I'm about to paste. Yes. Hi. Yes. Sorry, I interrupted you. How are you?
Oh, good. Good. Yes, very tired. I don't know what it is. Like I've struck a whole bunch of people that had like a couple of days like bad sleep, and you know, it's always hard when you've had no sleep. You're just sitting there going, is this person being really annoying, or is it just me? And
tolerance for idiocy goes down.
Oh, yeah. It takes up mental bandwidth, I tell you.
Hey, I've just realised that in tonight's show, we haven't really got anything specifically about the new makeup of government. It is included in one of the conversations about Winston, but the new government, the party, final numbers is what I'm saying, were announced on Friday, of course. I did a live TikTok and talked through it while it was happening, but we will get to that. I know we haven't really teased that, but we are talking about how Winston Peters is now officially New Zealand's Donald Trump. Talking about left-wing shills in the media, etc., 40-minute meandering conversations with groups saying nothing, and it's like the hair is almost there as well, if we're really honest. The full actual transmogrification into Winston Trump is actually there. So we will talk a bit about that tonight when we talk about the Winston Peters stuff itself. But before we get into things for tonight, and we do have quite a lot to talk about as we always do on Mondays, just want to remind you, and I'm putting links in all the chats right now, we are entering the New Zealand Podcast Awards, and they have a section called the Listener's Choice Award. And if you're looking at the screen right now, you're looking at the New Zealand Podcast Award page, and you just go to nzpodcastaward.com. When you go into vote here, go in there, put the podcast name, which you can do, #BHN or Big Hairy News, whichever you prefer. Your details and the link to the podcast now, because it's the Podcast Awards, an audio link is best, which is why, for your help, I've put into the chats the actual link to our audio podcast on Apple, so you can use that. So if you haven't done that yet and you'd like to do that, we would love to be nominated by you. We would appreciate that greatly. Podcast awards have been around for a few years now. I've never entered into them, never really thought about it, but we thought, well, why not? Let's just see what happens. But we are obviously up against News Talk ZB and RNZ and Spinoff and stuff.co.nz and people with actual budgets. So it'd be cool to be able to get our name in there somewhere. So that'll be one way that you guys could help out. What else, Chewy?
Oh God, I don't know. What else have we got, Pat? What's on the menu?
Well, there's actually quite a bit to talk about tonight. Before we do that, though, let's just say, because we haven't really acknowledged our lovely family for a couple of weeks now, which is because we've been doing merch drops. If you've got merch, it's all been ordered for this week, and we found out that the place Cloak that we get our shirts from don't do a 7XL in rust, but they do it in black. So I've been in contact with one person who ordered a 7XL. They didn't have the colour. We've got that ordered. So they're all ordered. They should be to me by Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, depending how quick they are. Not Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I'll have them in the courier either Thursday, or if it's Friday, it becomes Monday, and you'll be getting your stuff. So what we haven't been doing of recent times, because we've been doing that, is saying a huge thanks to all our patrons. And patrons have been growing. It's lovely. We're lovely to have you there. Brendan Christie went from, I think, the fuel level to patron level, which is $15 level recently. And Chris, I'm going to say Magurin, signed up in the last wee while. Just want to say thanks to all you guys. We've got 71, I think, patrons at the moment. Brings in about $700, and it does actually genuinely help. It helps pay bills. It means we're not going as backwards quite as fast as we would be. So it's a real real useful things. So thanks very much for that. If you want to be involved, if you want to be a part of our Patreon team, it's super simple. You just go to patreon.com/Big Hairy News, and it goes a little something like this. Hit it. There you go. There's Patreon.
Nice.
And we do a few things there. We don't do a lot on our Patreon. You know, depending on what we do next year, Patreon might come more to the forefront. But we put the odd early interview up there, and we have meetups, and that's just a way that I know you guys are helping us out. So I'm very grateful for that. And one other really quick thing, Chewy. I wonder who will be the first person to do this. Let's see, eh? We now have an official email address because people constantly say, how do we get in touch with you? And we say, through Discord or through Twitter, or a lot of people don't have either of those things. And if they want to get a hold of us, they can now at bighairynews@gmail.com. Super simple. I think I've set it up correctly. You can use that during the show as well. And if something comes through an email, I'm happy to throw it in the conversation. So you can chat with us. You can text in the various chats on the various social medias that we're playing right now, or you can email us as well. And that's obviously accessible 24/7, 365. So Chewy, that's us. And there's actually heaps going on tonight. Heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps going on tonight. We're going to have a look at a little bit around the treaty referendum, both what David Seymour said and what Willie Jackson said about it. We're also going to have a look at a conversation with Matthew Hooton over the weekend and what he had to say about National's tax plan. And finally, and this is not in the notes, so this is just for you guys joining with us. You're going to catch it now because it's from the 6 o'clock news, and I put together the show before 6 o'clock. Close Swarbrick, not just Close Swarbrick, but that's the example that's been mentioned at the news, using this chant from the rivers to the sea, and what it actually means, and why some are finding
lots of different interpretations on that, isn't there?
Yeah. But one of the things, and we talked a bit about this last week, and we talked about Damien Grant trying to censor speech whilst being part of the Free Speech Union. The one person I didn't mention when we talked about that last week, and we've used him as an example before, was old Karen Plunkett. Remember Karen Plunkett, when we had the alternate Jewish voices on, sent out a tweet saying, let's basically get this tweet reported. And so Karen Plunkett's another one of these people who's been screaming free speech from the rooftops. And again, you'll be surprised. Don't panic if the mound of pancake batter, you don't like watching them or hearing them or seeing them. I've got about a 10-second clip just again to show you the hypocrisy of some people who scream free speech, free speech, free speech from the rooftops, who don't want to protect, minorities, who literally say, no, they should be able to, that when it's literally, he says, when it's this minority, it makes a difference. And, is encouraging the Jewish Council to report speech to Human Rights Commission. So it's just, you do like to keep an accurate eye on what's going on, whānau, and you do want to see that these genuine and authentic hypocrites, when they show themselves, you have to call it out and you can't forget it. Now, if you're a Karen Plunkett fan, same goes for you, right? To their credit, when he tried to get one of our tweets reported after hearing we had the alternate Jewish voices on, there were many people in that thread who were fans of his going, I thought we weren't about suppressing free speech. I have respect for you, even if we disagree, because you're at least being consistent. And when I used to talk back, Cherry, that used to be a lot of what we did. If you're being consistent, and I can see how you get to your conclusion, if we disagree, even if we still completely disagree, I have the ability to be respectful of you. If you are a hypocrite, or if it's just I think this because, and you've got no way of getting to your conclusion, then I don't have much respect for you. And I don't think we needed to have respect for Karen Plunkett, but it's another good example as to the grift that is coming from some on the right, him being one of them. So lots of stuff to talk about. Anything you want to jump into before we jump into it?
You don't need to have respect for Plunkett in the same way that I don't respect a Ziploc bag full of 3-day-old custard.
Oh, I respect that more.
Just not necessarily.
But the custard's done nothing against us. It might have gone bad, but it's done nothing against us. So I do have an amount of respect for that. Because normally when the custard goes off, it's someone else's fault. They've left it somewhere. Whereas Plunkett's just all his fault.
Maybe this analogy is deeper than I thought, because at some point, the custard was both wanted and good to have around, which already puts it ahead of Plunkett at any stage of his career. So I'll think on that one.
Very good. Hey, let's have a look at News Hub Nation over the weekend. Matthew Hooton was on, and we last saw Matthew Hooton on Bomber's show, and I think you said this, Chewy. Where was he before the election? In other words, where was his commentary before the election? Remember, he looked at David Seymour and said, National will either fuck you quickly or they'll fuck you over slowly. That was a quote from Hooton to Seymour. So now he's talking a little bit about how the conversation is how ACT New Zealand First are positioning themselves in the negotiations at the moment. And then they go on to a bit of a conversation around, remember, National's cornerstone policy, everything they want to do is hinged on their tax cut policy. Everything. Their international buyers and their tax cut policies, everything. That's like the foundation of everything else. People like us were questioning it from day one when the numbers didn't work. Well, I guess now that you're looking at what, and we talked a bit about this last week actually, so maybe Hooton's following our lead. When you look at what ACT want and New Zealand First want, it's looking a lot more difficult to get something like that across the line. Now, this is Jenna Lynch. She's in the conversation as well. She says something terrifying and then laughs. And I think, oh my goodness, what she says is actually probably true, but the consequences of it, we know Mr. Luxon loves his consequences, are horrific. And it said very flippantly. Let's have a look.
Yeah, I just wonder about that time frame. I mean, is it positioning, Matthew, on both behalf, Winston and David Seymour yesterday, saying, we can do this within a matter of days? Does
I think they're
anybody believe anything like that?
No, but I think what they're doing is putting pressure on Christopher Luxon.
Right.
And they're both saying, look, we're not the problem here, and they'll want people to perceive that if there's any delay, it's the newbie, Christopher Luxon's fault that there's a delay. I guess the big thing that they're going to have furious arguments over is the centrepiece of the national campaign, which was the tax cut policy, which, let's just move on, it was a ridiculous policy. It was written by casino lobbyists and property developers, and it didn't add up.
Comrade Hooton again.
Winston Peters is...
Yeah, Hooton's not responsible at all, but just the way this is so flippantly said by commentators, like, we know they're all lying. Well, the public didn't. And the public voted for these bullshit policies. And now it's just like, they're not going to get them through, and Nicola Willis isn't going to resign. It's like, but hang on. Anyway, it's infuriating to me.
Is adamantly opposed to foreign buyers, Chinese buyers coming and buying up homes in New Zealand. And the ACT Party, to give it credit, it genuinely believes in fiscal responsibility and has opposed National's reckless and inflationary tax cut policy. So I think that's dead.
You think that's dead?
I can't see that they can get it in the time frame. I mean, it was meant to come in 1 July.
Yeah.
For that to happen, they'll need to legislate for the foreign buyer thing. They'll need to legislate for the casino thing.
Isn't it more likely that they still do the tax cuts and they just have to pay for them a different way?
Right.
Which would be less government.
Well, if they want to win the next election, I think they'd prefer not to do things which would drive up inflation interest rates. But
So can we just revisit that very throwaway comment? Isn't it just likely that they'll still do the tax cuts and have to find it somewhere else? Smirk. Because, again, we've been saying that for 6 months now.
Yep.
Where will that money come from? So if National wants to save face to push this through, where will that money come from? It will come from selling state-owned assets so landlords can get their money back and the wealthiest can get decent tax cuts, or massive amounts of cuts. And then we'll go back into the cycle that the public sector isn't serviced well enough because they will minimise the number of people in there. And then Labour will get back in 3 or 6 or 9 years, and they'll get the numbers back to what they should be. And then National will start saying, oh my God, they added 14,000 bureaucrats. It's like, well, because you got rid of 30,000 to find your fucking tax cuts for your rich mates, Chewy. And then the cycle continues.
Yeah, it's just straight out of the British Tory playbook, isn't it?
Yeah.
You run down public services, to the point where people were complaining because the service is bad and there's poor value, and then you sell it off. And I'm really worried. How quick did they turn around on Three Waters, right?
Yeah.
Right, are we going to take the Māori out of it? Because that's what we were stoking. And now we've done this, and we'll leave a sneaky backdoor into it to maybe get privatised. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
I haven't done this. I haven't done this yet, but I am going to go through from a couple of weeks ago and get a list of their 100-day promises. Because I know last week when we showed this about the gang patches, the response from Luxon is, "Well, we'll start something." But no, that's not what you promised. You promised to ban gang patches in the first 100 days, and his response last week was, we'll start the legislation to get there. So that's not what you promised. So it's really important for us to remember not just today what was said then, but in 3 years from now, remember what has been promised and not carried through on. Because remember, this new upcoming government is going to be in part there because they managed to sow the seed, rightfully or wrongly, that this current government, or the Labour government, is inept and couldn't do what they said they were going to do and never got anything done. So we have to hold them accountable to the same standard as they were criticising Labour for.
Yeah, remember, these tax cuts are for the low and squeezed middle income. Remember?
Yep.
And I guarantee you they will be the first to lose any sort of benefit, because who cares? You've done what you needed to do. You needed to vote National. We don't need to follow through for you. See you in 3 years. Business will be happy, and either our hand will be out to the Chinese to see if they're still giving out free money with absolutely no consequences, or we're absolutely going to gut everything that Labour have built.
Yep.
To fund
Lovely.
it.
Good times, folks. Good times. This has got 40 seconds to go. Let's get to the end of it.
That they still do the tax cuts and they just have to pay for them a different way.
Right.
Which is government.
Well, if they want to win the next election, I think they'd prefer not to do things which will drive up inflation and interest rates. But then, the problem is that whether or not enough of them in the National Party currently understand the relationship between government spending, interest rates, inflation. They may. The bureaucracy had a rough time over the last 6 years.
They're the party of fiscal responsibility. Surely they understand those kinds of relationships.
The bureaucracy is going to have a difficult job. For 6 years, it got some practice of dealing with people who didn't know what, say, aggregate demand was.
Right, okay.
But they're going to find that they're going to have the same problem.
I want to
with
talk about some other.
So the point being made there by Matthew Hooton is, obviously he's being facetious, but to say that National doesn't understand what inflation is. Now, I think they do understand what inflation is, but they're just trying to muddy the waters. And we've all seen it all the way through, whether it was Jack Tame catching out Luxon, making him admit that his tax cuts would be as inflationary, whether it was Nicola Willis saying they won't be inflationary, reading out script from, I think it was from Treasury, and it said wouldn't be as inflationary, meaning what she was talking about was inflationary. Whatever it was, I think they know obviously what it is, but they're trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the public that what they're going to do will be inflationary. Because inflation, real simply, remember, is more money in the economy than there is goods to buy. And that drives inflation. Tax cuts, more money in your pocket. Remember what Nicola Willis said? If every single person saves their tax cut, it won't be inflationary, which means it will be inflationary because not everyone's going to do that. And I don't know. I've seen some chats going past about people reckon it's going to be 3 months before people are regret their vote. I don't know. I have no idea. I know that when Brexit went through, there was regret and remorse literally the next day. I think this is going to be a tough time. And what it's important for us to do is to make sure we accept where the country is now based on where Labour's had it. In other words, if there are some issues like where inflation is right now, fair enough, put that on Labour's decisions. I'm okay with it because it saved 20,000 lives. But also not allow National for the next 3 years to blame all their issues on the outgoing government. They also have to have ownership of what they do, which is going to have flow-on effects, Chewy.
Yeah, I'm concerned that they might pull another page out of the Tory playbook. And it is one that has absolutely been disproven over the past 10, 15 years. And that's austerity. We need to put a freeze on public sector pay rises and hiring and public spending. That's how we'll get everything under control. Absolutely proven not to work. Absolutely proven to pour cold water over any sort of economic rebuild.
Yeah.
Because if the government tightens their belts, then they tighten the belts for everyone. But it's just very clear to me that National have a lot of links with the British Tory party and just seem to be getting a lot of advice from them. And if you see what the Tories have done to England over the last 10 years, that should scare the absolute bejesus out of all of us.
Yep. I mean, a lot of people were saying that Luxon would be the New Zealand's Theresa May. That's right, Theresa May. I don't think that's the case.
Fuck. I wish that mean he'd be gone real quick.
Well, I don't think it will be. I mean, will he do the damage that she did in that short time? Maybe so. I don't think he's going anywhere though, because I mean, who would take over? Who in the National Party would it be? Nicola Willis? Is she really the only other person that you can see leading that party right now?
Pat. Simeon Brown.
Oh,
Prime Minister.
But he fell into a pothole.
Bishop as deputy. Can you imagine that hellscape?
But if Simeon Brown became Prime Minister, he'd need one of those booster seats in the House so he could see over the top of the lectern, you know?
To be honest,
would he have to have a seat? He might have to have a seatbelt, because if you're under a certain height in those big boy seats, you might have to have a seatbelt on. I don't know.
Chris Bishop comes on stage before his stand-ups to put an upturned beer crate just behind the lectern.
Very good.
Wow, that's a fever dream.
People are suggesting maybe the new Margaret Thatcher there. And Raywin says that he'll do jeeps of damage, which is kind of a cool way of saying heaps of damage. Jeeps of damage. Oh, Kiwi Rob thinks Shane Retty leadership. Maybe.
Oh, I don't see it. I know he was well regarded for a bit. I think he's tanked that opinion, really.
That's my favourite so far from Brother Monk.
Oh, I don't want to say it this way, but the second coming of Judith.
She have to go pray about it. They'd have to go pray about it, though.
Oh, no. So, Talofa, New Zealand. Talofa.
This one there. Judith 2.0, the re-Talofa. All right, team. Let us keep trucking, shall we? Because we've got 3 or 4 things to get through today. So this morning, I believe, it's Monday, isn't it? Man, my brain.
It is Monday.
It is Monday. Mr. Seymour was... Oh, no, this wasn't this morning. Sorry, this is, again, from News Hub Nation. Mr. Seymour was on News Hub Nation. I think he looks like that's... it might be Mount Eden. I was going to say it's Mount Māori in the background of him. You tell me with your great knowledge of Auckland. It's probably Mount Eden, I guess. Quite a picturesque looking, though. I thought it looked like Māori Mountain. But anyway... Someone will know in the chat what mountains.
I tell you, if I was a cameraman, I'd be telling David to just back up a little bit. Back up. Back up.
The conversation came up, amongst other things, as to what were his non-negotiables still. Like, was the treaty referendum still a non-negotiable? This is what Mr. Seymour said.
Do you? Yesterday you were still talking as if crime and referendum on the treaty were sort of non-negotiables or your bottom lines. Are they? Could that really work? Or are you going to have to walk those back? Are you walking those back?
Like
in
you've
your
had to walk everything back.
Well, no, I'm not. And frankly, the Treaty of Waitangi is a beautiful document. It's a document that needs to be properly understood. The way the courts, the Waitangi Tribunal and the bureaucracy have interpreted over the last 40 years is not consistent with either the treaty or what works in democratic societies to give each person a dignified place in their nation state.
So you're not walking that back.
There's a discussion that needs to happen.
All right.
Really, there's a change of phrase there. A beautiful document. But saying... it might have been one of the debates, maybe. I can't remember who it was, but someone saying that, maybe it was Willie Jackson, that Mr. Seymour knows that Mr. Seymour is talking like he knows the treaty and the law and, issues around Māoridom better than all those academics that have come before him, better than the previous national government, better than all the experts who has got it to this point right now. And Seymour's just going, nah, they're using it wrong. They're just using it wrong. I don't know how anyone can find that feasible, that he's the Messiah and a very naughty boy, and every other expert that came before him, from academic to researcher to expert in Māoridom to expert in constitutional law, disagrees with him, but he's got all the answers. I just don't know how anyone finds it. I mean, I'm not smart enough or not well enough to comment on accuracy or not, but I am smart enough to kind of default to people who know. And it's everybody who set up the system and David Seymour. It just seems implausible, if I put it that way, Chewie.
Yeah, I do see that he's refining his language, because he knows he'll get absolutely crucified if he says, if he gets caught on this, like, we need to redo the treaty, which is how everything's being painted. But he's trying to be more clever than that. And by saying that the treaty is a beautiful document, and you know, I'm very pro treaty. The treaty's good. It's important. It's New Zealand's founding document. I'm not talking about that, but the very bad legal experts and the Māori elite academics and the treaty settlement gravy train, that is a mine of gold that he will keep mining to whittle away at how much progress we've made in understanding the treaty and implementing the treaty correctly in ways that we have not done for 150 odd years, where we've just cruised along with our majority, our white majority, our white European majority, and just gone, we don't need to pay attention to the Māori. There's bugger all of them. Carry on. So yeah, if he gets his way to in any way do a referendum on essentially our race relations, I'm not having it. I will not have it.
You know what? The other thing though, he didn't say it, you said it, that he wants to relitigate, like to redo the treaty. I'm actually okay with
the principles.
But I'm okay with the idea of redoing the treaty, because if you've ever been in a contract and one party wants to renegotiate the contract, that gives all the power to the other party as to what they will and won't accept. So if he wanted to relitigate it, what he's basically doing is saying, okay, Māori, what do we need to do to relitigate it, to rewrite this, to make this 2023 progressive, whatever. You know, like I always think about if you hold shares in a business and you get, what do they call it when you get like $1 every unit sold? What's that word called? It's jumped out of my head.
Commission.
It's not commission. It's like if you're part of the...
Spiff.
Anyway, and if you get
share.
that in perpetuity and then that company gets sold, then the new buyers have to negotiate with you to buy you out of that advantage. Royalty, that's what I'm thinking of. No, someone's saying dividend. I'm thinking royalty. If you got like a royalty, but then that company gets sold, then the company buying it has to actually then negotiate with you how are we going to wrap up that royalty. They don't just come, the new company doesn't come in and go, right, you're gone now. That doesn't work that way. You have to negotiate with the contract holders as to how you're going to write a new contract. So actually, that's not what Seymour's talking about, because he wouldn't do that. But that's what, if you're going to rewrite something, that's how you do it. And remember, I don't know how many dozens of times we've said this. The treaty is a contract between Māori and the Crown. Third parties don't get to come in and go, we're going to void that contract. That's not how contractual law works. Sorry, it's just not. So this whole referendum on the treaty, when I said earlier in an earlier show that the courts will overturn it, and that's not correct as to what I'm saying, but what I was meaning was the courts will get involved much like they did with the voting age being discriminatory, and they will make a ruling that will demonstrate that that was an illegal move if they try and do anything, because there are two parties in this, and those two parties get to decide, not all the external parties. Not it's the person who owns the house and their bank have the contract. The neighbour doesn't get to change the dealings of the contract you have with your bank of owning your house.
Yeah, I think as well we need to be careful about how we talk about what he's wanting to do, because if we go down the same path that a lot of people are doing, it's a referendum on the treaty, it's very easy for him to turn around and go, no, it's not, because it's not. to referendum around the principles of the treaty, which is a lot more nebulous and ill-formed as a concept. But if it's not looked at properly, you could get away with it. But yeah, I mean, I really struggle with this thing where people go, oh, the scales have tilted too far in favour of Māori. They haven't.
No. While they're at the bottom of every social
I think there
statistic.
I think there's almost a panic on behalf of Seymourers that we need to get this done before too many people sort of understand what the treaty is about.
Are you feeling okay? Because you were kind of measured then. This is not the Chewy I know. You're right. You actually pulled me back a bit then. Is everything okay? Are you all right?
It happens sometimes. You know, sometimes it's
I don't like it.
Tangential rant.
I don't like it.
Sometimes it's a note of caution.
All right. Now, the other thing, in a completely separate show, Willie Jackson was on with Jack Tame. And it was interesting, actually, because you can see where the timeline is for this. It's right near the end. It's only the last 60 seconds. He asked Willie Jackson, what are your plans for moving on? And Willie Jackson says, I have signaled that I would move on, but he goes, I feel like I need to stay, and I need to stay because of all this bullshit, my word, that's going to be coming out of the right-wing bubble of referendums and stuff. So this is what Willie Jackson said to Jack Tame on Saturday morning, I think.
What about you? Are you committed to staying for this full term?
You know, again, I think I was clear that I was probably looking to leave after the election, but I've been sort of convinced by a number of people close to me and within the party to stay around, and I want to stay because I'm nervous about what might be coming, you know, in terms of this nonsensical treaty referendum. Let me tell you now, Jack, if they try and push that through, you know, it'll be 81 Springbok tour, civil unrest, like, you know, times 5, times 10.
Violence?
Well, I hope not. One hopes not, but I've already heard. That's not something that Māori have advocated. It's certainly something that I'm not advocating, but I don't think we'd be able to manage it or control it when I hear from our people, come on, surely they're not going to do that after we used the system, after we went through the courts, after Māori mortgaged homes and their lives in terms of utilising the system, the English system, and got victories, and now all of a sudden they're going to change the rules. I don't think we'd be able to manage it in this country, and I hope that Mr. Luxon and Winston show a bit of common sense over this.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Willie Jackson.
There you go. Now, there's one, I find that a really interesting comment because I've been seeing conversations, of course, on Twitter and stuff about getting rid of the Māori. I wouldn't tell it that. Māori seats. And of course, the history of the Māori seats are basically European law got the majority of people in the country, which were Māori, and said, you can have those little areas. In other words, it was used as a way to subjugate the Māori vote to make sure Europeans still had power. And Māori have done it and have agreed to it and have voted in it. So it was of advantage to Pākehā or to Europeans or to the governing body when they put them in. And now that some see it as a disadvantage, they want to take them out. It's kind of the same as the treaty thing. It's like, hang on, you can't say, well, that works for us, so we'll make you use them. Now it works for us, so we'll get rid of them. It doesn't, you can't have it both ways. And so when Willie Jackson there was talking about doing it under kind of European ways, there's so much that I think Māori have run with, put up with, accepted, maybe not accepted, but had to fit within a certain bubble that doesn't naturally necessarily hit with them culturally. And they've done the work and they've done what they needed to do. And now that perhaps on some instances they're getting ahead in some areas or they're utilising it well, it's like the same group that wanted to disadvantage them, 150 years ago, their representatives today want to disadvantage them again because, it just makes me think, Chewy, of that saying that for those in power, equality feels like oppression. That just feels like it's all over this.
Yeah, and I think he's right. I think if ever you were going to light a powder keg in this country, you know, I think race relations is always simmering away because it's always something that somebody's not happy with. Either someone is absolutely crying and pissing themselves in their car because someone put up a sign that said a school is now called Kura. Or we're talking about the fact that Dunedin has a second name. And they're furious. But then you take away that process and you take away sort of any redress for the previous 150 years. Then the other side is going to be absolutely furious. And when we look at the past couple of years at the protests that we've had, you know, the groundswell convoy, the anti-vax sort of thing, I think there are more people with a dog in the fight over how we deal with the treaty and how we deal with race relations in this country. There are more people with a dog in the fight enough to get them out on the streets. That, yes, that has to be a legitimate concern. And I was pleased to see that Luxon has immediately started to fucking distance himself from something that is going to be divisive. And basically trying to shut that down. That is a good thing. I think he is reading the writing on the wall on that. But I wonder how much pressure he's getting from within his own party over it. I wonder how much it's going to feature in government negotiations. If Seymour is going to push this right to the front, we know that Winston is probably going to be right there behind him on a similar sort of thing. Yeah. Because according to Winston, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and some other thing that they used to do in the 40s, it is going to be how they attack it. Now, when it's down to the line and they need to form this government, it only takes one of those guys to dig their heels in and go, well, this actually is a bottom line for me and I'm not backing down. It's worrying.
Yeah, and I think Winston talks about a speech that he made in 2005, and he kind of Winston jokes about how it's basically everything ACT is saying now. So Winston and ACT are very similar when it comes to that issue. Certainly, I don't think Winston believes any of that shit. I really don't. I just think he knows it gets him votes. And speaking of Luxon, Famiko says that he didn't rule it out though, the referendum, and he didn't rule it out. He did sort of rule it out when in the 6 months leading up, and then he softened, and then he said it's not our policy, and recently he said it would be unhelpful. So he did rule it out way back. Let's maybe talk 6 months ago, maybe 4 months ago, but then he has softened to it because I think as someone who keeps telling us how good he is at negotiations, he has to obviously be aware that he's going to have to give up. And that could be one of the things he gives up. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, because it came up, was this whole 1981 times 10. People are looking to that and they're thinking, whoa, what are they doing? They're calling for violence. They're calling for violence. It's like, I actually think he's probably right. But I also think it's probably appropriate. I mean, Willie Jackson said very clearly there, I would be the same. I'm sure Chewy would be the same of never calling for violence. But I think that would turn people out into the streets like maybe almost nothing has ever done before. Maybe that we haven't seen since 1981. And I think when you get those people out there in a heated moment, look, some people sometimes accuse me of blaming the victim when I kind of say, what did you expect? And I always reply to them by saying, whatever the most dangerous street in New Zealand is, I should be able to go down there with $10,000 in each of my hands, waving it above my head, blowing a whistle. Now, I should be able to do that, but I think we all know if I did do that, there might be some consequences that would happen to me. It wouldn't make them okay. So what we should be able to do, what should happen, and what the reality is sometimes two very different things. And I'm saying if we had that kind of emotional response, I think the reality is, not that we're saying it's good, not that we're endorsing it, that you're going to get some alt-right Nazi group on the other side, you're going to get heated, and it will. There'll be violence. It'll be 1981 all over again, but maybe bigger, because I think it wouldn't be a 50-50 split. It would be a 70-30 split or a 60-40 split. And I think it would be huge.
Yeah. I think the one thing that would change that is just how how the political leadership and the police would deal with it. And I think we've moved on in a lot of ways from how they did things in the early to mid 80s. That it would be more de-escalation from that side of it than anything. But that doesn't mean that there won't be disruption. That just means that there will be less chance of violence. I think when you look at what happened with the Springbok tours, in a lot of ways, the protesters' reaction was to police escalation. So hopefully we've learned from that. But I think just think for a lot of people...
Hang on, just think about that. Now think about that. Have that pictured in your head about the escalation of the police, and now say Mark Mitchell's in charge of them. What's Mark Mitchell going to insist of his police? We've just seen what happens when you take a particular route for those protests in Wellington. What's Mark Mitchell's direction going to be?
I think Mark Mitchell's direction would be to swap out tear gas grenades for Chanel No. 5. He's obviously got shares in the cosmetics industry, so that tracks for me. Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people, and just admittedly in my circles and that sort of thing, and a lot of people go, yes, a treaty issue, or as we said, like a relitigation of the treaty, is something that would get people out on the streets, and we've seen like lefty causes get people out on the streets. I mean, most recently, there's been the Palestinian marches and stuff like that. I think back to the TPPA marches and that sort of thing. That was a hell of a lot of people with absolutely no violence or anything like that. It was just people going out on the street and going, this is an issue that is important enough for me to sack off a day of work or do a sign and just march with other people that believe the same things that I do. And we've seen that with the anti-vax crowd and Groundswell and that sort of thing. Like Groundswell, as an example, knows that they didn't have the numbers, but what they did have was vehicles to make their numbers seem bigger.
Yeah.
I don't think if it's a discussion on treaty issues, you're not going to need a tractor to make your march noticeable. It is going to be a lot of people.
Yeah.
100%. And I tell you that now, if this goes further down the track, I will be one of those people. I have no problem putting my name to that.
Right. We are going to move on now, unless there's anything in the chat that you particularly want to put out before we move into the next topic, which is a little bit about Winston and what's happening with our new hairless leader.
Just one comment. There's nothing wrong with Chanel No. 5. My children at school always say I smell pretty. Mark Mitchell, thanks you for your patronage.
In the 90s, I used to use Jazz as a aftershave. Yeah, Jazz in a black and white bottle. Probably dates me. All right. We haven't really got a setup or a conversation necessarily going about the numbers in the government, the new numbers, but it does come up in this conversation. So we'll have a look at it as a part of this. And I've got some other video to show you as well of old Winston actually becoming New Zealand's Donald Trump. Like, he's got the hair for it as well. It's all happened. Here's the story of a lovely lady who is growing up in something, three ugly men. Anyway, here it is.
To Politics International and ACT may be close to doing a deal, but ACT and New Zealand First are still yet to talk. Winston Peters remaining tight-lipped when touching down in Wellington today. Political editor Jessica Much-Mackay is watching developments. She joins us now live from Parliament. Where are things at, Jess?
Christopher Luxon and Winston Peters are now both here in Wellington, and that will allow for those face-to-face negotiations. ACT and National are far through a deal, I'm told, and quite close to getting to the end of it. But
which is ridiculous, because they haven't done any negotiations with New Zealand First. So how can ACT and National come to an agreement? What if Winston goes, no, don't agree to that? So it seems really weird that National and ACT are negotiating and they're yet to basically talk to Winston. There were some conversations today about David Seymour texted Winston and Winston ignored it because he thought it was fake, which is a
I think he
said
it was a scam, which I can tell you that all people of Winston's age think every text message is a scam until it actually is a scam, and then they've got their credit card out.
All right.
anticipated, having 3 parties in the mix is making things more complicated. I also understand that Winston Peters has refused to respond to David Seymour's invitation to have a chat, and Winston Peters definitely was not very chatty at Wellington Airport today and when he arrived here at Parliament, refusing to give the public any indication of how the government negotiations...
It's funny how she words that, refusing to give the public, refusing to give the media. So I'm going to show you this whole clip as well. It's only about 90 seconds long. I'll show you Winston at the airport as well. And the media sounds pretty desperate, being really frank with you.
Are going to try and form a government, and also the timings for forming a government.
All right, give us an idea. When can we expect the decision?
Well, behind the scenes, I'm told that things are looking unlikely to emerge this week, but there is a possibility that...
Oh, hang on, Mr. Luxon. I thought it was all taking too long. I thought that we were supposed to get on this more quickly. What are you saying? Not this week, Mr. Luxon. That's too long. You should have it sorted out by Wednesday, or else it's just too long.
Could speed up and we could see something this weekend. That's definitely something that Christopher Luxon will be pushing for. He's hoping to go to APEC with other world leaders next week, but he will have to sort things at home first.
All right, that's about the forming of the government that should sit behind you there, Jess. What about the opposition?
Well, all the Labor MPs are coming back here to Wellington tomorrow to meet. They will have a caucus and the leadership issue will be discussed. Now, within 3 months under Labor rules, you have to have a leadership vote. One of the options is that Chris Hipkins could be elected unopposed, and sources close to Chris Hipkins say that they're confident that that will happen. If there is someone who wants to contest that, they will have to get 2/3 of caucus support to be able to roll him.
That's massive.
At Parliament.
So that's really big. So that's not going to happen. There's not going to be 2/3 of a majority of caucus members to roll Chippy. Yeah, that is what it is. So, Chewy, I was live streaming on TikTok on Friday afternoon when the announcement came out. And long story short, everyone knows this now, so we can just bandy over it. But the right lost 2 seats, and the left picked up 3, I believe. 3.
Yeah.
If you include the if you include the Māori Party as left, so the Māori Party got 2, Greens got 1. And spectacular for the Māori Party. Of course, it meant that New Zealand, the National Party and ACT only could get to 59, and because of the overhang, it means they need 62, so they can't get there by themselves. And I haven't done the numbers yet. I'm going to look at them maybe tomorrow, but I understand. Remember, we had all that hype about the most diverse group of national MPs have ever been. I understand that both, I could be wrong with this, but I've heard, I haven't looked yet, that both of the National Party MPs that got knocked out were Pacifica. And so that they're actually, strangely enough, very white and male again, Chewy, strangely. I will look at that and do the official numbers and come to you maybe tomorrow night with that.
Okay.
So take it with a grain of salt. But good result, amazing result for Māori Party. The other part about that Willie Jackson conversation with Jack Tame was basically him saying, what happened? What happened to the Māori seats? And he basically went, I don't know. Good on the Māori Party.
I can tell him what happened. You had an authentically Māori voice all the way through, unapologetically Māori voice. Like there was no couching that in political terms, or we can't be seen to be too unpalatable by Pākehā and that sort of thing. They knew the audience that they were playing for, and their electorate responded. I wonder if there's a lesson in that for other parties.
Yeah, and the other thing was the special votes. Obviously a huge number of the special votes went to the Māori Party, and that's because a huge number of voters turned up and registered on the day. So it's on the day registrations became special votes. So that means the Māori Party's groundwork to get people to the polls, registering and voting worked really well for them. You know, that whole grassroots thing, Chewy, that people used to use all the time and now they use TikToks.
Yeah. Massively important. Talk to the people that aren't being represented. And I can tell you for the other parties, I'll tell you where those people are. They are between the ages of 18 and 30. Nobody is bothering to talk to those people. You know, especially at the younger end of that, if they're brought up at all, they're brought up as a problem to solve.
I want to have a look at Mr. Peters at the airport. the media comes across as desperate, and he comes across as an old curmudgeon. You know, but this is only 90 seconds. Let's have a look at the walk.
Both things are true.
From Mr. Peters. Somewhat neutering the media again.
How are you feeling?
How are you today? Are you playing games with David Seymour?
Are you playing games with David Seymour, was that question.
Hey, would you rather be... Okay. Have you spoken to Mr. Seymour?
Have you spoken to Mr. Seymour?
This is cringe.
It's like fucking Beyonce's in town.
How are you feeling, Mr.
Party? Are you worried that the ACT Party is going to hold up negotiations and you aren't going to be able to get it done quickly?
In terms of negotiations, Mr. Peters, the pension age, is that a bottom line for you, the pension age?
How long will negotiations take? How soaked up is your negotiation with power at the moment? Would you like me to carry your suitcase?
Would you like me to carry your suitcase?
I'm just being nice, genuinely.
Anything nice to say about David Seymour? That was a question.
David Seymour said there's still a bit of bad blood between you. Is that how you feel as well?
Have you spoken to David Seymour yet?
There's been reports of the ACT Party putting together a draft agreement already. Is that premature?
Hi guys.
Is it premature for people to be putting together draft agreements when they haven't spoken to you?
Are you hoping for all three parties to get in a room together soon?
Wow. Just wow.
We'll take it down. We'll take the volume down because there's no embarrassing. Please give us a wave at the end like there was last time. But, you know, I mean, credit where credit's due. Winston's got a cause that he's going for, and he has the upper hand over the media right now. One wonders, does he also have upper hand over the negotiations as well? So
Winston's been doing this for a long time, and the media love talking to him because when he does want to talk, he's going to give them a soundbite.
And
he's
he's
going
fun.
to give them something salacious that'll get clicks. It'll go on the news. Awesome, but he knows what he's doing in this case. What possible thing will benefit him for saying anything at that moment?
Yeah, as Simon's saying, by saying nothing,
all the power
he's saying heaps.
is there for him.
Yeah.
He's like Seymour's saying everything that he possibly fucking can at the moment, and yeah, that was embarrassing to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, and
Like,
it's a power move
embarrassed for everyone. Yeah,
I want
absolutely.
to show you now. There was reports that he spoke at Port Waikato and he spoke for 40 minutes. It was meandering. I didn't watch the whole thing. I couldn't bring myself to. I know sometimes whānau, I say I'll watch it. You don't have to, but I couldn't even bring myself to do that. But just to show the Trumpian vibe, as I said, he's gone full Winston Trump with the hair and all. This is the bit that the media has been talking about, how he's been calling out the media. Just think, close your eyes and think Trump, and think about these words that come out of his mouth.
These people aren't motivated in the way they say they are. Because if you saw that night, and I was sitting there thinking, God, I'm sitting around with a whole lot of glum people, and we've
These people are the media, by the way, just so you're clear.
just won. It's true. We're all sitting there analysing and thinking, gee, this is not good. And we've just won. We knew on election night that we held all the cards, but we had to stand around and listen to all these political experts like Jack Tame and every other left-wing shill paid for by the taxpayer, go on and on and on and on and still going on. And then have the effrontery to say, would you like to come onto my show?
I tell you what, Mr. Peters, Jack Tame ate you alive when you went on his show. So
That's why he's going after him.
I imagine you won't go back on a show and you'll try and sell it under some kind of bravado that I'm not wasting my time with him, but he detonated a bomb above you when you went on his show. You were the foolish-looking shill, if we can use that word in that conversation.
Oh, and by the way, they're on there banging away about the government, if it has formed, will have nobody from Pacifica on it. And I'm sitting there thinking, listen, Jack Tame, you moron.
Jesus.
No, I'm sorry. We're Pacifica. We're also half Irish and half Scots.
You know, I mean, what part
Wow.
of that doesn't sound like you know, the lamestream media, they're against me, it's from the song play. And I'll say it again, Jack Tame cut your lunch and ate it in front of you, Mr. Peters, when you were last on his show. 100%.
Yeah, I mean, we saw all of those Jack Tame interviews in the run-up to the election, and I have to say he lashed everyone to the bone.
Yeah.
Like, to say that he was left-wing, I watched the interview with Hipkins. He didn't spare Hipkins at all.
Yep.
And yeah, just this whole media thing. Look, there's shit that the media does that drives me batty. We criticize it a lot, but it's certainly not that they're too left wing. It's like they're too genuinely, like, just not kicking over enough rocks for me to be happy. So
They're
they've
corporate.
absolutely failed us in the run up to this election.
Yeah, they're corporate. They're like, what they put at the top of their agenda is money. It's neither left nor right. It's finance. That's why the thumbnails. That's where the term clickbait comes from. Like they start their process of driving from finance, and as we've seen with like the you know, Today FM and I was going to say the platform. What am I saying? The project. You know, I know that they will probably have some kind of sell about, you know, it was time to wrap up, and I tell you what, if it was rating, it was paying for itself, it wouldn't go anywhere. So that's why places like RNZ are so important, because they don't have that at the top of their agenda. TVNZ is halfway there. I know that people may not be aware of this, but there's no New Zealand Air funding for news and TVNZ other than a couple of shows. So those debates that we watch, and I know this because obviously I was talking to TVNZ once they got us kicked off YouTube, they don't get funding for those debates and stuff. So when we all say, you know, we're paying for TVNZ, some parts, other parts no. And news is not a NZ on Air funded conversation, because NZ on Air doesn't fund carte blanche. They fund projects. So therefore they fund Q&A because that's a specified project. They won't fund One News because that's not. So that still has to pay for itself. RNZ, very different. RNZ, all government money. You know, they don't have to worry about the money being at the top of the list, which is why they're so important. So very important.
Yeah, maybe Winston still thinks we're under the old BBC model, and he's just angry about people paying licensing fees.
I actually think that's a great idea. I'd happily pay a licensing fee each year for a TV one.
Wasn't that one of the discussions with the RNZ merger? Was to make public media a bit more self-sustaining. But the other thing I have to say about that meeting of just absolute vibrant go-getters in our community is that he's playing the hits.
Yeah.
The biggest laugh he got there was from calling someone a moron.
Yeah. But someone in the media. So this is the Trump thing again. You know, when Trump says something about the media, all his followers go, oh, that's what I'm saying. It's from Trump's playbook. I think I just scared the dog by making that noise. She walked out of the room and I made that noise. She walked back in looking at me like this. That's all right. You're okay. All right, listen, we're getting up towards the end of the first hour, so we better wrap up in the last 2 minutes for this 20-minute conversation around this conversation about the saying that Chloe Swarbrick used, the chant that she used, and what it means and where it comes from. Let's have a bit of I don't want to be flippant and say a quick look at this because it's a much bigger conversation than that, but let's have a look at this conversation. And
90-minute hour.
And Mondays are always a bit long because there's so much to talk about. And have a look at the alleged controversy.
Green MP Chloe Swarbrick's under fire for using a term that many perceive to be anti-Semitic at a rally supporting Palestinians.
By many, they're meaning in New Zealand primarily the Jewish Council and their evangelical supporters. That's the many, just so we're clear.
At the weekend.
The Jewish Council of New Zealand is calling on her to explain herself. Political reporter Amelia Wade has more.
Ignorance from a war museum is despicable! Green MP Chloe Swarbrick was furious on Saturday.
We stand for a free Palestine.
She took the stage at a pro-Palestine rally after Labour MP Phil Twyford was shouted off the stage.
Folks!
And escorted out by police. It was then that Swarbrick and the Greens took over and she yelled this controversial phrase,
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free!
she essentially stoked the crowd and with this incendiary chant.
The rallying cry calls for a unified Palestine state, stretching from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, a return to the land that is now Israel. The slogan has been around for decades and appears in Palestinian folklore and revolutionary songs. But it is often labelled pro-Hamas, and many, like Juliet Moses, believe it's a call to destroy Israel.
It is offensive. It is widely understood to be a call for the annihilation of Israel and quite possibly...
The words widely understood is doing some pretty heavy lifting there. It is their perspective. I'm going to show you the two sides argument too, but the word widely understood, just so people are clear, is doing some heavy lifting. Like making it seem that it's a 90% assurity that that's what most people think.
Pat, quick question. As of right now, whose people are getting destroyed?
I think it's Israel's, isn't it? Because they're the ones who are suffering the worst impact at the moment. Am I wrong?
Not sure if that's accurate.
Okay, I'll check my sources and come back to you.
The Jewish people.
The phrase is also included in Hamas's manifesto. Moses wants answers from Swarbrick.
I think she should explain why she used it and what exactly she meant by using it and what her intention was.
Neither Chloe Swarbrick nor her boss Marama Davidson, who was there on Saturday, would do any explaining today. But the Greens did send through a statement, but it didn't address why Swarbrick used such an inflammatory chant.
Interesting turn of phrase by the New Zealand media, an inflammatory chant. Controversial. Inflammatory makes it seem like if you use this, you know it's going to inflame. I'm not sure whether that's accurate or not, but that's how the media is selling it.
But News Hub's learned of some disquiet about the remarks, with one Green insider telling us that Swarbrick undermined her calls for peace and justice by deliberately using such a charged chant. Amelia Wade.
So, Chewy, I've got quite an in-depth conversation from Al Jazeera to talk about this phrase, what it all means, but this is a little bit in your warehouse. You want to share any thoughts on it first of all?
So there's a bit of history to that that particular phrase, and there's one key takeaway there. Doesn't it rhyme so well in English? So I noticed David Seymour criticising Chloe for using a phrase that Hamas have apparently used. Hamas didn't come up with it.
No.
There are versions of it that go back to the PLO.
Yeah, 64. I've got all that history to share shortly.
But it is an English phrase.
Yeah.
It rhymes in English. It was created by activists that spoke English. There are different interpretations of it. I'm not going to poo-poo that. There are versions of it that you could go, well, they want the whole state of Palestine from the river to the sea. There are revisions of that are like, well, no, they want Palestinians to be free from the river to the sea and free of I was going to say almost apartheid state, the apartheid state that they live in. And I think that's not up for debate. If you can watch any sort of footage on how Palestinians, especially in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, are treated, it is an apartheid state. I think when you look at what is going on in Gaza at the moment, it's beyond any sort of reciprocation. It has gone way beyond that. I noticed a story the other day that Israel blew up an ambulance and said, "Hey, look, it's because that they were transporting Hamas fighters or whatever." It doesn't matter. That's a war crime, and it has been a war crime for decades. In the Geneva Convention, you can't hit ambulances, and they've done it. They've bombed hospitals. The balance is way out of whack.
Let's look at the actual slogan, because that's what we were talking about.
Mm.
From the river to the sea, what does the Palestinian slogan actually mean? Now, I've just highlighted a few pieces I'm going to read to you from the story on Al Jazeera. So this is a bit of history about how it's being used right now, or the controversy around it. The United Kingdom's Labour Party on Monday suspended Member of Parliament Andy MacDonald for using the phrase between the river and the sea in a speech at a pro-Palestinian rally. Earlier this month, Home Secretary Suella Braverman described pro-Palestinian demonstrations as hate marches and warned that the slogan should be interrupted as an indication of a violent desire for the elimination of Israel. The Football Association in the UK has banned players from using that slogan on their private social media accounts. Australian police took a similar stance, banning a pro-Palestine protest on the basis of the chant and claiming the slogan, originally formulated by the Palestinian Liberation Organisation, the PLO, had been adopted by the armed group Hamas. German authorities declared the slogan forbidden and indictable and called on schools in the capital Berlin to ban the use of keffiyehs, the Palestinian scarf. What are the origins of the slogan? That's a bit of a background as to how the West is treating that slogan at the moment. What are the origins of the slogan? Upon its creation by diaspora Palestinians in 1964 under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, the PLO called for the establishment of a single state that extended from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea to encompass its historic territories. The debate over partition predates the formation of the State of Israel in 1948, a plan put forward a year earlier by the United Nations to divide the territory into a Jewish state occupied 62% of the former British mandate, and a separate Palestinian state was rejected by Arab leaders at the time. Naima Sultani, and this is what does it actually mean? To Palestinians and Israeli observers alike, different interpretations over the meaning of the slogan hang on the term free. A lecturer at the Law School of Oriental and African Studies in London said the adjective express the need for equality for all inhabitants of historic Palestine. Those who support apartheid and Jewish supremacy will find the egalitarian chant objectionable, Sultani, a Palestinian citizen of Israel, told Al Jazeera. Freedom here refers to the fact that Palestinians have been denied the realization of their right to self-determination since Britain granted the Jews the right to establish a national homeland in Palestine through the Balfour Declaration of 1917. It's important to remember this chant in English, and it doesn't rhyme in Arabic. It is used in demonstrations in Western countries, he said. The controversy has been fabricated to present solidarity in the West with Palestinians. Now, the flip side, pro-Israel observers, however, argue the slogan has a chilling effect to Jewish Israelis with what this phrase says is that between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, there will be one entity. It will be called Palestine. There will be no Jewish state, and the status of Jews in whatever entity arises will be very unclear. Yedhua Mirsky, a Jerusalem-based rabbi and professor of Near Eastern and Judaic studies at Bradeus University. It sounds much more like a threat than a promise of liberation. It doesn't betoken a future in which Jews can have full lives and be themselves, he said, adding that the slogan made it more difficult for left-wing Israelis to advocate for dialogue. Mirsky argued that those who chant the slogan are, quote, supporters of Hamas, end quote, while Sultani, the other side, claimed that pro-Palestinian protesters should not be equated to supporters of the armed group, who were the exception at the 1,000-strong protest. Finally, that's the just the slogan. So there's kind of both sides of it. And I guess the question that I would ask Chloe Swarbrick, because now you have to say this, right? If you're pro-Palestine, if you're a supporter of Palestine, this is what it means. If you're a supporter of Israel, this is what it means. And I guess those two sides are never going to agree on that. So one of the questions that would be asked was it wise to use it? No criticism, by the way. I'm not saying she shouldn't have. But as an MP, should she have used it or not? That'll be an interesting conversation, knowing that the other side think of it in a certain way. Now, I know some people, that will probably anger some people watching that I've even said that. I'm not saying she shouldn't have. I'm just saying as an MP sitting, was it inflammatory? Did it inflame? Is it the right thing to do there and then? I mean, personally, I don't have any problems with it. Personally, right? No issues with Chloe saying it. But from her perspective as someone, I guess, coming up to being in opposition, will it further the cause that she wants, or will it drag it backwards? Because now you've got calls for her to be censured, maybe? Chewy?
I think we're kind of circling around a similar sort of point to when we talked about Posey Parker getting sourced.
Right.
Is a politician should maybe see that as much as the argument around that phrase is potentially bullshit. I mean, that rabbi talking about, Jews carrying on their lives and all of that sort of stuff. Palestinians can't carry out their lives, their normal lives, literally just down the road from him. So I'm sorry he's offended by a phrase. I'm offended by stacks of dead children and rubble. I'm offended by an Israeli politician suggesting that they should nuke Gaza and get it over and done with.
Can I interrupt? Keep your thought process there, because I just wanted to bring this up, because I think there's a really, really good point you've just made, right? Which is, these are words, right? This was a story from CNN over the weekend. A Palestinian American family mourns 42 relatives killed in a single day in Gaza. So the point that you just made about what Gazans can actually do right now, Palestinians can do right now, there's stories coming out now, and thanks to social media, we're getting accounts that wouldn't normally be there. So examples of a single family losing 42 people in one day, not 42 members of Hamas, 42 family members killed in a single day in Hamas. So I actually think the point you've made then is really, really good and valid, Chewy, that the Jewish rabbi is saying it speaks of a future where we may not be free to live where we want. And then we go, well, how about today? How about today in Gaza? And I just wanted to add this into your point, because I read this through the weekend. And
it's exactly right.
Yeah. So sorry, continue.
I really struggle with this one, because it's like, I absolutely understand the reason why Israel was formed. I understand the wars that they fought for their existence, and how that has framed the country that they are now. Their reaction, I think, to this is completely phrased by what's happened in the past. When someone comes for me, I will come back at them with such furious anger that they will never do it again.
Yeah.
And that's they did it when Egypt, Jordan, Syria, all of them. You're completely surrounded on all sides by unfriendly nations armed by the Russians. That you had to knock people back on their heels so hard that they wouldn't do it again. But they have applied that to basically a place smaller than Auckland. They have shown absolutely zero restraint. And their stated goal of getting hostages back, this isn't going to accomplish that. They're flinging out so much high explosive around how they're going to find anybody. And they've absolutely poisoned public opinion against them as well. There's been more focus about how Palestinians have been treated that I have seen in the past week than I've seen for years.
Yeah.
The running death toll of Palestinian civilians, it's always ticking over. It always has been. This is just a dramatic uptick. There have been more civilians killed in the last week in Gaza and in the West Bank now as well, than there have been in the Ukraine in 2 years.
Wow.
It is just so out the gates disproportionate, and they showing absolutely no heed to public opinion. And Western leaders absolutely paralyzed by this narrative that's been trotted out, that if you criticize the state of Israel, or if you criticize the idea of Zionism, then you are anti-Jewish, you are anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And the world is rightly sensitive to that because the Holocaust happened. But you've got to be able to hold more than one idea in your head at the same time.
And that's true, though, true. And like I told you this last week, because of the conversations we've been having, which I actually think have been very, like on day one, we reported that it was being reported that Israel bombed a hospital. On day two, we said, well, there's actually BBC saying it looks like it came from within Hamas. On day three, we shared another, like that architectural group who said it looked like the rockets came from where. So we've actually been quite information focused on this. Yet because we've had that conversation, mentioning not both sidesing the issue, but giving you the information, I've been added to anti-Semitic lists going around Twitter right now. So I'm on anti-Semitic lists going around Twitter right now, which I don't care about, but that just goes to show that it's like if you're not 100% with us, then you're 100% against us. And that doesn't help anything. I just wanted to say, Rachel in the chat has just said that in Dunedin there's a woman who's lost 21 members of her family in 8 days. Now, I'm not saying this makes it even more atrocious, but we don't need to look to CNN and something in America. We can look to our own stories. You know, in Dunedin, 21 members of Dunedin women's family killed in Gaza. So I actually think that point you made, Chewy, and I'll say nobody, because I hope nobody watching the show would ever think that. Nobody wants to see harm come to the citizens of Israel. No one wants to see surrounding areas or terrorist groups, you know, literally push them into the sea, right? No one wants to see that. But equally, at the moment, what's happening is no one wants to see what's going on in Gaza. And like, no one wants to see the threats that Israel are saying are coming from that chant. But even if they were threats, they're just threats at the minute. What's happening in Gaza today is, can I use the phrase ethnic cleansing? Can I use the phrase Holocaust? Probably can't. That's probably wrong. Can I use the phrase raze it to the ground? Like, so we have on one side people being offended. Look, let's just do this, right? And again, this might annoy some people. Let's just say that the way is the Council of Israel, if that's what it's called, is correct, and that's what the phrase means. It means we want to see the elimination of all Israelis. Let's say that's what it means. That's what's a projected future based on a slogan that might happen in the future if everything lined up. That's now happening in Gaza today. So there's the
slogan, and then there's the doing.
My focus to seeing something stop. If I could pick, let's stop them saying the slogan, or let's stop buildings being pancaked in Gaza. I wouldn't be so worried about the slogan. I'd be more worried about the buildings being pancaked. I think that's where I am.
I think getting back to the history of Israel and the way that they do things as well. Like, Israel has shown that they have the resources, the patience, and the cunning to be entirely surgical when they go after someone.
Yeah.
You know, they've taken out leaders of Hamas and the PLO in the past and hit exactly who they wanted to at a moment of their choosing. You know, if they wanted to do a decapitation strike, we'll find out who planned this attack. I'm sure if they bided their time, they would be able to do it. I wouldn't even really be talking about this as the IDF wanted to roll people back into Gaza, to put the wall back up, to roll up as many Hamas terrorists that were in their territory as possible. But Israel has the luxury of being one of the most militarized countries on the planet. What concerns me is the person that is doing this, Netanyahu, is an enormously unpopular leader in Israel at the moment.
Yeah.
There's a poll, 75% disapproval. There is a corruption inquiry into him. He has stacked the judiciary, which is making people very, very uncomfortable. There was a protest outside his house this weekend, including families of people who've been taken hostage, and the mounted police were set upon them. So I'm really concerned about how this attack happened, not allowed to happen, how it went on for so long, and why this is it stacking up? Is it reinforcing the leadership of a deeply unpopular leader? Because people tend to rally in times of conflict. Is this a country that is so well protected and is such an overmatch on its adversary that they have the luxury of time and they have the luxury of restraint, and they are using none of it. They are just using fury and firepower against a city packed full of children and civilians, and Hamas in amongst it. It's just calling for a ceasefire till everybody fucking works out what's going on benefits nobody but the civilians. And that's what this front and center. I don't care what the Israeli government thinks. I don't care what the Jewish council here thinks, unless we are talking about civilians, unless we are talking about dead children in the middle of, we're not having Hamas fighters in an arena versus IDF fighters. If they want to do that, I'm all for it. I personally think the solution to this, as unlikely as it is they need to get to a place between Palestinians and Israelis saying this land is important to both of us and we need to meet in the middle. And when one side is just getting pushed to annihilation, when you have entire generations of families being wiped out, do you think that the survivors are going to look at Israel and go, yeah, fair enough?
Yeah.
No, it is going to be generations, just like it was in Ireland.
Yep.
The sectarian violence there, that went on for generations until it got to a point where people went, maybe that's enough killing.
Look, do you know what? I can speak to that because I had second cousins in the IRA, right? And I never met them, but my mum went there several times, and they used to live in a part of Belfast backed onto a mountain called the Black Mountain, and the teenage boys would be out at night, come back with soot all over their hands, and mum would say, "What are you guys doing?" And they're saying, "Making Molotov cocktails up the mountain." And mum would talk to them and say, "Why do you guys do this? Why are you involved?" And they didn't know, because it had become generational. They did it because their dads did it or their uncles did it. They had no actual input. They hated the English, and they had no real cognizant reason as to why they did it, just other than because that's what we do. And that's what you're saying. You're saying, hang on, these guys on to the north of us killed my grandmother, my grandfather, two of my brothers, my dad, all these people. Well, why are we fighting back? Because that's what we do when someone kills 42 of your family members in one day.
Kids are going to be raised in hate. And yeah, I've been to that same part of Ireland around Belfast and that sort of thing. And the thing that doesn't often get reported now is that there's still bombs that go off in Belfast now, right? But they go off in rubbish bins, and the police get heaps of notice. And it's almost performative violence at this point.
All right.
And it's almost like, well, I set a bomb off because my dad's father got killed in the Troubles, and I don't want to be the first generation to let this go. So I'm going to blow up a rubbish bin. I don't want to hurt anybody. But, that's taken them years. And the way that sort of tailed off was religious leaders going, this has gone on too long. We've got to lock some people in a church and just fucking thrash this out. And that took, like, how long did the Irish problem go on for?
Sinn Féin got in the late 80s, early 90s.
Most of a century?
Yeah. I mean, probably the mid 90s. I mean, they give Bill Clinton quite a bit of credit for helping broker a peace deal. So that would have been in the 90s.
Yeah. So who is going to wade into the Israel-Palestine situation? Like, Russia's all for it because it's drawn focus away from Ukraine. America is so horribly compromised by their evangelical commitment to stoking on the end times in Israel. It's just a mess. And while we debate slogans and wouldn't it be nice if this happened, civilians get bombed, and hospitals get bombed, and ambulances get bombed, and tanks are driving through a ruined city trying to work out if the movement they just saw was a family trying to get away, or whether it's Hamas fighters waiting to pull an ambush.
Yep.
So you better fire and make sure. It's
Yeah.
Incredibly frustrating.
Last thing for tonight, and I know it's kind of a little bit of a tangent now that we've sort of gone on, or we've extended this conversation, but I did want to play this little bit of audio from Karen today, because he had Juliet Moses on, and it's really important that we hold people to the standard they expect of others. It's really important that if someone claims a standard for party A, B, and C, that they also have to adhere to that standard. And I'll just play this little 10, 15 seconds when basically Karen's talking about, free speech. And like, I think it's free speech, and, minorities, and they shouldn't, because his whole thing is, minority classes shouldn't be protected. Everything should be free speech until now.
And look, I've got to say, part of me is conflicted by this. Part of me says this is freedom of speech. You're offended, so the hell what? But we do actually have laws against this in this country, and they're quite specific, particularly when it comes to persecuted minorities. Have you made any approach to the Human Rights Commission or the Race Relations Commissioner?
So there you go. That's all you need to hear. So he's now going down the path of persecuted minorities should be, maybe free speech doesn't apply all of a sudden to persecuted minorities. I'm happy he's taken that path now, because I'm sure you could slip Māori into that persecuted minorities, and so he's now going to be all for that, or thinks maybe not. Maybe that's the hypocrisy. All I'll say to you again is we must hold people accountable to the standards they insist on other parties. They must at least be held accountable to the same standard. And that mound of pancake batter is always talking about free speech. And you heard him couch it. Yeah, there's part of me which thinks maybe it's free speech, but we all know what but means. It means, but they shouldn't be saying it. And I think, Chewy, I wasn't sitting on the fence on this at all, but I was wondering how to word it. I think what you've said to me is clearest and best of all. We're talking about potentially an aggressive chant, which potentially some interpret as meaning annihilating some people, right? Yet the people who are saying this is offensive because it's talking about annihilating us are currently annihilating a group of people. So I feel pretty clear as to where I stand on it now. So what I love about this show, guys, is I learn, hopefully we all learn, and that thing that when we talk things out, we come to a conclusion. And I think for anyone else having this conversation tomorrow, there's a focal point. Even if you give the Jewish Council the accurate take, that it's about pushing the Israelis into the sea, right? Or annihilating Israelis, if that's what the chant is about. If you accept that, and I'm not saying it is, but if you accept that, that's right now what's happening to Palestinians, people in Gaza. So what they're worried about happening in the future based on the chant of 300 people in Auckland, right? What they're worried about a possible future is happening today at the hands of the Israeli government.
I think I've said everything that I can muster on this so far, but I am going to leave you with something. We're going to look back to old Winston and Seymour, and with all the discussion that there'll be about them coming together and coming together. Oh, I don't like that. Finding common ground. And we're all pulling in the same direction, and we're all a happy team now.
You can't say pulling and coming in the same sentence, bro. It's not allowed.
Well, I've done it, and I won't take it back. Whenever we see that, I want you guys to hold in your mind this fantastic interaction that happened between them. Winston says, the first comment was David Seymour. Winston Peters' swan song promises to slash immigration is tragic. Peters himself will soon be retired and require a care worker to help him get dressed and go for a walk.
Oof.
He'll discover that some facilities can't function without migrant workers. And Winston's response to that was, I've spent much of my career respecting and working for retirees. You seem to want to euthanize them. As for your nasty comments about my physical, I reckon you'd last 10 seconds in the ring with me. There'd be 3 hits, you hitting me hitting you, and the ambulance hitting 100. Thank your lucky stars that I'm not into physical violence.
Do you know how bad someone is when they mess it up? The 3 hits are me hitting you, you hitting the floor, and the ambulance hitting. He says that he even in his mock he gets it wrong, because he's saying Seymour's going to hit him first. Winston, it's me hitting you, you hitting the floor, the ambulance hitting 100. Come on, even get your mocks right, mate. Anyway.
Well, he's hardly Muhammad Ali, both in the mouth or in the ring. But that was from 2020. But the internet never forgets. I saw it, and now you folks have seen it.
Big thanks to Rachel for the super chat. Remember, Old Wahine marched because they knew it was the way to be heard by Māori who benefits from amping up the violent rhetoric. That came in a wee while ago when we were talking about the march around the proposed principles of the treaty referendum. Thank you for your super chat, Rachel. We appreciate it greatly. On that note, I guess if you are interested, if you are enjoying what we do, if you like it, if you want to be more involved, love to have you as a patron. Patreon.com/Big Hairy News. All our patrons go on our billboard, as you can see here. It's getting harder to fill it all in. I had to split our patrons in half because there's so many of you, which is amazing. I'd love to have another few people to make it more difficult for me to figure it out. That's a problem.
Create a problem.
Create a problem for me to try and figure out how to make a new billboard. Patreon.com/Big Hairy News. Really appreciate you guys being on board. Genuinely helps. It's a great benefit, actually. So thank you very much from my heart. Thank you very much. Alrighty. Anything else, Chewy?
I have one funny story. First cruise ship of the season in Dunedin today.
Yeah.
And I famously love cruise ships. But I had to help a cluster of cruisers who wanted to use public transport to go and see the steepest street in the world, Baldwin Street here in Dunedin.
Right.
They wanted to take a public bus, so I told them what bus that they went
Number 8.
on, and that there was a stop nearby, so they could get off and have a look at it. Oh no, we won't get off the bus. We don't want to get off. Maybe we could ask the driver if he'll drive us to the top. High value cruise ship tourism.
It's terrifying. People are unaware of it. I always say to people when I'm taking them to the steepest street, I say, and I set myself up for it not to happen. I go, when you drive past it, you'll go, oh my God, or something similar. And I say it to them before I drive to it. And I know that makes them kind of go, well, I'm not going to say that. But invariably, is that the right word? Every time we drive past, people go, holy mackerel. I've driven up it twice. I drove up it once with my mum, and she was terrified. Like, honestly, it's a different feeling. There was actually a house for sale at the very top of Baldwin Street. It's a T junction, and then those two at the end are dead ends. And there was a house just here for sale, and I wanted to go check it out just to drive up it again. But like, if you don't have a 4-wheel drive, in many winter days, you're not getting up Baldwin Street if you live up there. It's amazing.
When I was a little baby trying to break into the broadcasting industry, and we were working promotions for was now More FM down here, but it was 4XO then. Me and a mate had to drive to the top in the station vehicle, and we tried to turn around and almost rolled down that hill. So yeah, very, very scary. But the idea of a city bus, that somehow these guys were going to convince the driver to go off route and try and drive that bus to the top. I just laughed and walked away. It was hilarious.
It's a Baldwin Street's made of concrete because it's so steep that when they lay asphalt, it actually starts to move backwards. So the steep part of Baldwin Street has to be made of concrete. And there's actually one, if you ever want to check it out, if you're in Dunedin, because you're not supposed to drive up it because it's residential. But if you go one street down, I think it's called Delmany, and if you go up that one, it goes past the old post office around the corner, and there's another concrete road just at the back there. So it's probably not as steep, but it's probably within a couple of degrees, and it's pretty terrifying as well. All right, guys. Yes, so here endeth our lesson on the cool things to do in Dunedin. See streets and stuff. See streets and shapes. The world's steepest street and an octagon. All right, team. We'll catch you tomorrow night for another edition of Big Hairy News. We'll be here at 9. We'll see you then. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. And until then, we'll just say goodbye.
No.